Hi everyone, and thanks for joining me again. This will be my very last interview. Um, so I decided to interview myself, or basically pose the questions to myself, and answer them in a way to share my experiences and my thoughts about the whole topic revolving around colonialism and capitalism. So, how does colonialism and capitalism affect my environment and the nature surrounding me? So I'm gonna start with colonialism and then kind of just like jump into capitalism, just because they're both very well rooted within each other and like they kind of bounce off one another in a way. So yeah, so colonialism. My first thought when I think about colonialism is Europeans coming in to these different lands and just taking over the land and basically telling the indigenous that inhabited these lands that their way of life wasn't good, it wasn't progressive, or it didn't meet up to their expectations or standards that the Europeans brought. And so, and that brings up the whole concept of how erasure of culture started. So, as the Europeans came in and took over these lands, they basically settled in these lands, hence the word settler colonialism, and basically took apart everything that the indigenous people were doing. They said that the resources or the materials that they were gathering, or that the ways that they were doing this gathering, was not right in the eyes of the European, and they had to do it this way. And so when it came to a lot of basically settling these agreements in order to determine who was rightful of the land, the Europeans were like, yeah, no, we are the ones that are rightful for this land because we're doing it this way. And this is how we are labeling it to be the rightful way of actually using up all the resources in a much better way, if that makes sense. So in a way, the indigenous people didn't really have much to say. They didn't have these powerful forces in place in order to deteriorate a community, because that's not what they were about. They were about community. They were about supporting each other, just helping out their community that they lived with, making sure that their community had all the resources needed to be sustained and being sustainable, while the Europeans were just starting in a very early age, in a very early era, to degrade the land, to use the land in any way, shape, or form that they weren't held accountable for. So yeah, that's what I think of when I think of colonialism. Is the first thoughts of that. In regards to social erasure, not social, cultural erasure, I think of what's happening now and more recently. I think of very much about white supremacy and white privilege. Why I think about that is because so I could start with like either or of my examples that I'm thinking about in my head. When I was smaller, when I was around in kindergarten, I had a best friend. Her name was Paloma. She didn't speak any English, and I was basically the only one in the class that would talk to her. Maybe because the other kids were embarrassed to talk Spanish, or they didn't know Spanish. I don't know. But so I would explain like basically all the assignments that we had in the class and what we were doing and basically how to do it, all in Spanish, of course. The teacher had no idea of this. She had like no clue that she didn't speak any English. up until around like the middle of the year, where the teacher actually started to like, walk around and like talk to all of us and actually try to get us to talk in conversation. And then she realized that like when she tried to talk to Paloma, she wouldn't say anything, or she would just like, just smile awkwardly, not understanding what the teacher was saying. So she picked up on that, and then she asked me, because she always saw that I was talking to her and like having conversation. She was just like, she asked me like, oh, is like your friend shy? Like, what's going on? And I was like, oh, she just doesn't speak any English. And the teacher was just like, oh, okay. So how has she been doing all this work and stuff? And she's like, oh, and then I'm like, oh, well, I've been explaining it in Spanish to her and whatever. And then she tells me, she's like, oh, well, I mean, I appreciate that, but I would also appreciate if you didn't communicate in Spanish, because she should know English. She should be speaking in English. This is basically in the terms of, this is America, we speak English. She should be speaking English. That's that. And to me, that affected me a lot, because I was a kid. I was like 5 or 6 years old. And to be told that I couldn't speak a language of my culture because we're in a different country, when America doesn't even have an official language, is absurd. Like, now that I really think about it, like that's part of an erasure of culture, because I'm not the only person who has experienced that, and people have experienced it a lot worse. I remember growing up in high school, my high school district, the one that I was supposed to go to, was an F school. My mom did not want me going there, so she sent me off to a magnet school, which was predominantly white. I hated high school. Like, to be honest, I hated high school, just because, like, like the whole phrase of like, skin folk is kinfolk. It's very true in some aspects. Like, you normally gravitate towards people that look like you, that talk like you, that have similar experiences as you. And that was me. Like, like in middle school, like elementary school, I very much gravitated toward like the Hispanic community. Again, Florida being like a melting pot, there was a very big Hispanic community. A lot of us always spoke Spanish. Like, none of us ever really cared about speaking Spanish in school and stuff like that. But then again, I was somewhat very hesitant to at times, because of the whole experience that I had in kindergarten, where this teacher was like, you shouldn't be speaking Spanish because you're in America. And then, yeah. And then I went to high school. And then I was basically one of the four Hispanic women in my class. That says a lot. My class was around like 380 people, I think, around that. So yeah, it was like a smaller-ish school. But then again, like, the majority of the population was white. Like, you had your typical rich white kids, your spoiled white kids. Not only was this like a magnet school, but the majority of the people that went to the school were rich. They had like Corvettes, Chargers in the parking lot. Like, that was like your typical car that people own, like your Mercedes. And it's just like, whoa. I felt very much out of place. And like I very much clung to my 4 friends that were Hispanic. Um, yeah, and it very much like felt really weird. Like there was like up until one point that I was talking in Spanish to like one of my friends, and like one of these like little white people were like, why are you speaking in Spanish? Why don't you just go back to your country so you can speak Spanish there? And we're both like, wow. Like we obviously ignored it because it's a conflict of interest to start a fight at a school where, you know, you're gonna be nitpicked as the one who started the fight. So we ignored it. Anyway, I guess that's where I pick up where the whole cultural the erasure of culture is. You know, people of different backgrounds, of different diversified minds are always just nitpicked at. They're always told like this is not right because it's not this way, or you shouldn't be doing this because it's not the right way to do it. And like, you know, what is the right way to do something? There is no right way to do something unless it's math or science or like straight facts, you know? And I've always believed that like diversified minds, like people of color, black people, queer and trans, like all these other like I don't like to label people, but all these diversified minds, they always bring something different to the table because their experiences in life were different. Their experiences in life were very much different. Like just with my own experiences when I first moved to Colorado, I moved to Colorado Springs. So Colorado Springs to me was very much like what Tallahassee is to Florida. Tallahassee is so one corner you have like your college community. You have FAMU, which is like a historically black university and college, and then you have like FSU, which is your very dominant white party school. And then you cross that line either from FAMU or FSU, and it becomes very much redneck, very much so, very much dominantly white. And that's kind of like what Colorado Springs was to me. Yeah, I had the blessing of getting a cool job with people that were very much open. But I don't know how to explain it. I just feel like sometimes like America is very much deeply embedded of like that erasure of cultures. Like, you know, like we're American, we have to celebrate America, even though we have thousands and millions of people that are not just American that make up this country. Like for me, I'm Colombian American. Yeah, I was born here, but my family raised me as Colombian, to be Colombian, to basically practice Colombian holidays, you know, and just have that mindset of like caring and helping out your community, which I've said it in previous videos how I feel that within America, I feel like we're very much standoffish when it comes to those terms. We, you know, like we don't know our neighbors. We don't even say hi to people when we walk across, like when we're on the street, or like if we're walking our dog or like just out for a stroll. We don't say hi. We don't say like good morning or anything like that. Or good afternoon. And like that's very much not how it is in Hispanic cultures. We're very much open to just saying hi, stirring up a conversation with anybody that walks by us. And I feel like me being born in America has very much over time erased that part of me. I'm trying to get it back now, but it's very hard, you know, like being told for 10 plus years that like this is not the right way and you shouldn't be doing it that way. You know, like those sort of things. And it brings me back to like my name. I don't know why my voice is shaking, but my name, Carolina. When my mom and dad named me, they wanted me to have a name that was easily pronounced by other people. So they named me Carolina. It is pronounced Carolina. And over the years, I've kind of just let people say it as Carolina. I don't mind it at all. You know, whatever preference you have to that name, either or the pronunciation is there. You know, it's like, it's that thought that over the years you've been so accustomed to these ways, you know, you start thinking, should I do it this way? Should I do it that way? You know, I've always been told not to do it that way, but I feel like I should do it this way. And it's like all those thoughts start to circulate in your head, and you start like thinking like, what is my culture, you know? And it's like, yeah, you have like your national holidays, like the Colombian Independence Day that's celebrated down in Miami. I'm not sure if in Colorado. But yeah, all of like what I've just mentioned is very much so colonial aspect, that very much control of people, trying to persuade people, not persuade, but use force in order to basically make people do what you think is best, you know? And that leads me to capitalism. So capitalism is a whole different like can of worms. Well, not very much so, because capitalism is very much also a control of people, not just by culture and the erasure of culture, but how capitalists are always profiting off of the people, off of nature, how they're degrading nature, how they're degrading us, and very much how my other peers and my other coworkers have talked about how it is depressing, it is tiring. We live in this endless cycle of work, trying to keep money to live and survive and keep food on the table, and any other little pastimes that we like to do, like that causes money. You know, anything that we see right now, like anything that's in our room is part of the whole cycle of capitalism, like because we shop, and that goes back to feeding the big monopoly that is causing capitalism. But you know, at the end of the day, like, and through one of my videos that I've had that I uploaded, my friend said, you know, think of it this way. Yeah, capitalism sucks, but people in other countries have it worse. You know, like we get up every day and we choose not to have these sucky jobs. But what I mean by sucky jobs is those jobs that we see that third world countries have, or only third world countries have. Either like going out and mining, or going out and having to fish with nets on this river while everybody else is doing the same thing on this little tiny boat. We have different opportunities here. Like if we get an education, or if we become an entrepreneur, if we get a certificate online, we have all these many different possibilities that basically don't require us to have that basically don't involve us in having to do those jobs that we don't want to do, you know? And that to me really got me thinking, like, yeah, capitalism does suck. We are in this endless cycle, you know, and in these third world countries, they do have it a lot worse. But if we are in such a developed country, why are we so tired? Why are we putting our people down in order to not be able to succeed? You know, why are we degrading our resources? You know, with such a developed country, why are we one of the most greatest producers of carbon? You know, why are we making these changes for the betterment of the earth and for the betterment of our people? Like, you know, why aren't we seeing these changes? Why aren't we being paid better? Why is the economy so questionable? Like, for example, I can give so many examples actually. One of the examples that I really think capitalism has a lot to do with is me having to take my schoolwork to work. I take my schoolwork everywhere, honestly. But the majority of the time, like, I find myself having to either like print out articles for me to read to keep up with the course, to keep up with the class, and while I'm at work. And yeah, I'm fortunate enough to have a particularly easy job where I'm able to just print out these things and bring them and incorporate them within the whole narrative of where I work. But sometimes even that gets very tiring, because it's like you're not fully focused in what you are reading. You're not fully aware of, like, your attention can be taken at any moment by a guest, by a person just coming in and trying to experience what Meow Wolf is. And that sucks, because it shouldn't be that way. Like, I can't afford to take off work because I need the money to pay rent, to pay bills, but I can't afford not to do my schoolwork during those times because I don't have enough time in the day. It's hard. And even with just being like a part-time employee, I do find myself, like this past semester, I did find myself struggling to keep up with some of these things. And it's just that cycle again that I'm telling you that we're not able to benefit from, because people are tearing us down. Like, people make more of a profit by not giving their employees enough profit in order to succeed. And you know, we need to make a better system to actually better our people. It's like I was saying before, like, if we're such a developed country, we shouldn't be having to compete against one another in order to have a roof over our head, you know, in order to make ends meet. And that's one of the things that I can think of right now about capitalism and how it affects me. Well, it affects me in many ways, but in regards to doing these videos, it has really opened up my eyes that we only have one life. And you know, some people may think of it as being a competition, being in this competition, finding a way to support one another, just living to meet your basic needs. And then also, you know, finding a way to escape every once in a while, going on a hike, going and just being one within whatever area you're in, just being outside, soaking up some sun, just reflecting on things, or just, laying there and not thinking about anything. And that's okay. That is okay. So yeah, these interviews really opened up my eyes to seeing capitalism in a very different way. It could either be positive and it could be negative. Very much so negative. But we have to remember, and this is the positive, we have to remember to, support one another. Be in the community that we're in and helping that community. Because, we're not alone in how we feel. We have this community. And just being there. And, like my analysis for all these different interviews very much showed the indigenous aspect of these approaches, that whole sense of community and having support with your people. Just bringing that back and bringing that idea of your community is very much a big source to your mental health, because although sometimes you may feel alone, you have this community. Your community may even just be your dog or your cat or your pets or your social media account or your very close circle that you tell all your things to. That is your community. And that community is there to support you, to help you. And even like your work community, even though like I feel like people in Colorado are very kind. They are very kind. They do everything out of genuine care and love and support. And that's something that we need in like every part of this country, and not just this country, but everywhere in the world, I feel though that in other parts of the world they have a much better sense of community and support than America does, because they know the struggle. They've lived the struggle, and they're currently living in the struggle of just keeping their head above the water. So my analysis for these videos very much talk about also Liberation and how violence and harm have very much to do with colonialism and capitalism. A lot of these people in power they continue the violence because they only take care of what is the harm. So what I mean by that is they don't resolve the problem of the root of the problem. They resolve it in other nitpick alternative ways to solve them, instead of actually using 100% renewable resources. People that choose to use them are only using them. And what I mean by that is because the oil industry is very much big and it's very much embedded into our system. And there's a lot of people in power in the oil industry. And you take away the oil industry, you take away that source of income that other people are gaining from keeping the oil industry alive. And so they create these carbon offsets where you buy a certain amount of credits to essentially take care of your debt that you're releasing into the atmosphere. And what I mean by the debt is that carbon that's being released, or whatever other toxic chemical that is being released into the air or the groundwater or the soil from these different industries, like the oil industry, refineries, chemical plants. I can go on, but they take those debts and turn it into credits in order to basically resolve this other piece of land and bringing up this other piece of land so it could be like offsetting what they are putting out into the world. And it's like, why don't we just not approve this program or this thing that is created or being created? You know, why do we not approve that? And instead of using your money to create more degrade and damage to the earth and the people, why don't we actually implement that money to help the people and the environment around you? You know? But I mean, in a perfect world, we would have that. But unfortunately, we don't live in a perfect world. Our world is very much revolved around money. We always think about economics, and it's like that whole chart of that whole circle graph of being like having social, economic, and the environment, and in like the very middle is sustainability, and how, you know, sustainability would be the middle aspect of all those three. But what always gets picked first or put on the higher spectrum of the list? Economic. And then I think it's social. And then I think it's the environment. In a perfect world, we would see it as all equal. We would take into consideration all aspects of these things and live in that system, because social has a lot to do with the betterment of people. So we would take away capitalism and just reconstruct it completely, you know, have our people uplifted and actually working for the betterment of themselves instead of working for an employer that doesn't care for them. We also bring up Laboran in the sense of care, how just being one with nature is very much a big aspect for people's mental health. That sense of care and with your kin, you know, just realizing that things don't belong to you, and if you want to use them, like, they'll call to you, you know, and that's when you know to accept it. And the whole aspect of, I bring up a lot of the example of how the Boiron in their office, they have people not listening to music, you know, just actually being one with the fish when they're dissecting the fish in order for science, and just being grateful that the fish is there and giving them like a proper goodbye. All these different aspects that need to be embedded in our research culture as well, because I feel like we just do things in the name of science, you know, and like I feel like that's just an excusable form for us to do anything. Bring up a lot of underflows and how different diversified minds bring in different ideas, different things into these systems, you know, realizing that this system, it is trash. It is very much a system rooted for us to fail. And with these different minds, we create a new ways to realize that we need to change it, and new ways that, you know, that we are changing it, bring up a lot of, so when I realized about colonialism is a lot of what Marx brings up with primitive accumulation and that whole cycle of everything, and the whole cycle of social reproduction as well, is brought up a lot. The whole of everyday, like the fleshy, messy, intermediate, everyday life things by cats, that's brought up a lot. And all of these like aspects that I'm bringing up, it's all correlated with how I was explaining colonialism and capitalism, and how we can I didn't bring up any resolutions on how to actually change it, but I did bring up in how specifically individuals like you and me and like the people that I interviewed or had these conversations with, how it actually started to get them to think about these ideas and these different formulas in their head. And I felt like just with that, it's a very good step in the right direction. Just because, like I've said it multiple times in the previous videos, like these conversations are not had in the workplace. They're not had in the school place. Like, they're very much not a topic of conversation because they could be very controversial. I mean, they are, but it could lead to other controversial events that could happen if the conversation escalates the wrong way. So yeah. And I think, we all have our very own different experiences when it comes to colonialism and capitalism, and how regardless of these experiences, we build up the knowledge in order to find ways to combat it or find ways to deal with it. And it sucks to say, but it's like, I don't know. We need more indigenous approaches to these things. Like I've been saying, indigenous approaches, diversified minds, in order to change the system that we live in, because it's not sustainable and it's not working, and it's draining our people, and it's very much so degrading our environment. And I don't know, it's a very depressing topics, and sometimes it takes a lot out of me. So realizing during these interviews that I needed to take a step back and recollect to gather my thoughts for my own interview, I feel like I did the right choice, because there was like a million things going on in my head during the duration of all these interviews. I was just like going all over the place and just trying to keep up with these topics and what my interviews were consisting of, and how I can go with the flow of what the participant was saying. And like, that's okay. Like, some of these topics are gonna hit home for people, and it's okay to talk about them. It's okay to realize and connect with your literature and your courses, because that's what this is for. So if there are any more questions, just email me, and I think that is all for now. And thank you for watching my video series. I very much appreciate it, and I hope everyone has a good life. Thank you.